Hello family, it's Teresa with the Shaman's Dream Project, and today is the final installment in the series called Holi-days and Holi-days. And I have saved the best for last. This one they call Christmas. So it's a lot to cover, and I'll probably do it in 2 videos because it takes like hours and hours, days sometimes, to upload a 20-minute video. So bear with me. I'm just going to briefly touch on the origins of the sacred holy days and compare and contrast to the modern day traditions that are associated with the holidays, as usual. And I will include a lot of show notes in the resources so you can go and check these things out for yourself. But before we begin, I have a question I would like to throw out there and see if anybody would like to ponder this. The question is why do we lie to children? Why do we tell them about make-believe reindeers and Santa Claus? Why do we lie to children? And you know, as the so-called grown-ups, the children trust us to decipher for them what is right and what is wrong, what is truth, what is fiction. And it's a big responsibility. The trust of these children is precious. And I don't believe, in my heart, I don't feel that it's any good time to really lie to kids about anything. But I just wanted to see what you felt about that, family. And then secondly, you know, if we're gonna, let's say, even if, you know, like we're gonna make up this story and say, yeah, there's this guy and he makes a list and he checks it twice and he finds out who's naughty and nice, like, you know, if you're not covering up your emotions as a child and just putting on a fake smile all the time, then I guess you could be considered naughty. And in that event, you don't get any presents. So like Santa Claus doesn't love you, kind of thing. So it's really kind of wicked the way we unknowingly, but through this holiday, with the lure of receiving a gift or not receiving a gift, we kind of teach children to be on their best behavior. You know, like always put on a front, even though maybe you don't feel so good, you know, and you want to scream and shout about it, but you can't really do that. So that's kind of a pretty big issue in our society, you know, is, you know, we're not like really, it's not acceptable, socially acceptable to express your feelings and stuff. You're just supposed to smile and say, oh yes, I'm fine. Anyhow, but you know, so there's that, and then it's this whole concept of like there's this person that's watching you all the time, and you know, he's gonna punish you or reward you based on whatever contrived behavior that you are coerced into expressing. And so I just wanted to, like, I don't know, throw that out there before we talked about the holiday. So without further ado, so what's a little background on this? So as far as we're able to tell based on the evidence that we have at hand, it's pretty widely accepted amongst the scholars that the first shaman originated in the land, what is now called Siberia. And at this time of the year, we didn't use Caesar's fake calendar back then, but if you had to transpose the time frame onto Caesar's calendar, you would end up with roughly December 21st, which is considered the Winter Solstice. So in these northern climes, you know, at that time of the year, there was very, very little daylight. And quite oftentimes you were snowed in, and it was pretty dark. So you really did pay attention to when the sun rose and when the sun set. And in the night sky, from the northern climes, we would look into the horizon and see the Southern Cross. And that is where the sun appeared to, quote unquote, die every day, or the sunset every day, on the Southern Cross. And then with December 21st being the shortest day of the year, and I want to say, like, it would have been like 18 hours of darkness. So they would see that the sun set on the Southern Cross, but then 3 days later, or 3 cycles of the sun later, we would see the sun come up again on the horizon. So the sun was reborn 3 days after he died on the Southern Cross. So so the ancestors, many about that same time frame, so we're just talking maybe, I don't know, between 5,000 and 3,000 years ago, the ancestors celebrated a festival, and let me read from my notes so I make sure to pronounce this correctly, but it's Natalis Solis Invincti, and basically that means the birthday of the invincible sun. In other words, like the sun would appear to die every day when the sun set, and then it would be reborn again. So it was considered Invicti or Invictus or invincible. The shaman in the Siberia would also, because it was very depressing that time, your Yuletide log was down to hardly nothing, and the food that you were able to scrape up and store and save for the winter was getting pretty low. Nobody had been outside the house because the houses were snowed in. You couldn't get out the windows or the doors. It's kind of one of these times where you could call it like a near-death experience, because every winter for them, it was kind of like, am I going to make it through the winter or not? So the shaman would take the children who had small hands and delicate fingers, and they would go out into the forest with their, I guess, snowshoes or whatever, because the drifts of the snow were really like really deep, so you wanted to displace your weight as much as possible, otherwise you'd sink into the snowbank and not get very far. So the shaman would take the children out into the forest, and they would look underneath these big, huge pine trees for the psilocybin mushrooms, the red mushrooms with the white polka dots. And they're very delicate because they're very wet, and they've been under these snowbanks for several months, and so they're very wet and very heavy to carry back to the village. So the shaman would take the mushrooms and put them in the fir trees to dry, to make them more lightweight to carry back to the village. So so far we've touched a little bit on where the Easter egg hunt comes from, and where does the concept of Christmas tree decorations come from. So then the shaman would put these dried mushrooms in his sack, and he would go back to the village, to the houses that were all snowed in and impenetrable from the windows or the doors, so they would have to put a lean-to up against the house, and then he'd have to go in through the furnace or the chimney or smokestack or whatever you call it to deliver the psilocybin mushrooms, so that the people could lift the veil and see, how everything is just an illusion. This is just a dream, and although I might possibly have to give up my physical body, I'll be born again, just like the sun. I'm Invictus, right? And so that was the gifts. That's where the gifts, the Santa Claus coming through the chimney, that's where that originated. And excuse me, I have spiders coming to visit me. So yeah, that's sort of explains the winter solstice, the desperation that the people felt, the psilocybin mushrooms and all that. And so these were like the ancient sort of sacred holy days that they would celebrate, which is a time to consider the rebirth that always comes after the death, the spring that always follows the winter, and set our sights on that time when the snow was melted and the land was very fertile and you could leave the house and, you know, it was just a little bit nicer in the springtime and the summer than it was in the winter. So it was something to sort of set your intentions. Like, you know, gosh, I almost perished in that last winter shut-in. But this next spring, because I have been given another opportunity to spend some more time in this skin suit, what do I want to accomplish? You know, so it's a time for setting intentions, right? It was very sacred and, you know, very meaningful for the people. It had, you know, a spiritual element to it. It was spiritual, you know, right? So where did Christmas come from? So we'll fast forward to the year 340 AD, which I'll clarify is AD means after death, which refers to the death of the Jesus Christ character. And for those that want to look at it from something other than Caesar's calendar, you could call it current era or before current era, BCE. So, but in the year 340, current era, Caesar's calendar, this guy named Pope Julius, and this was only 15 years, just 15 years after the Council of Nicaea, where they got together, they meaning the Holy Roman Empire, and said, you know, let's get everybody to follow just one religion. So they called all these shaman and magi and priest class from all over the different empires at a council, and it was called the Council of Nicaea. And this is where they sat down, and in theory they were going to take the information from all these shamans and elders and, you know, keepers of the wisdom, and put it together in a single book that everybody could reference, you know. But there was quite a lot that was left out, and what wasn't left out was obscured. And the purpose of this, obviously, is if you can control the information, if you can control the knowledge, then you can control the belief systems and the narrative and the reality and everything that follows. So that was the purpose of writing the so-called holy book called the Bible. But this was just 15 years after they sat down to do this. And this Pope Julius guy declared that the 25th of December was the day that Jesus Christ was born. I don't know who this Pope Julius guy is, but if he's like any of the other popes, I don't trust him. I certainly wouldn't listen to anything he had to say. Like, I would listen, but I wouldn't take it on board. I wouldn't believe it, you know, because it's pedophile central, you know, the Catholic Church, and it's like, it's not something that I resonate with, so I'm not inclined to listen to any of their edicts or their Holi-days. So, but anyhow, that's where he said it was Jesus' birthday, and that there was this Immaculate Conception. Conception without sin, the church says, but sin is an archery term, which means to have made a mistake or to miss the bullseye. So again, it's deception. So this Immaculate Conception story has been told throughout history for, gosh, dozens and dozens of times, like as far back as we can tell. for thousands and thousands of years before the church ever came on the scene. So what makes their version of the story the one and only truth? I have an issue with that. So I have my own theories on what the Immaculate Conception is. In just real quickly, it's when our inner self is in balance, in harmony, and our divine masculine and our divine feminine is in harmony, in unity, and we're not, swinging into the polarity. Then when we have that union, we give birth to something, a project, or a work of art, or a relationship, or fill in the blank, whatever you create, and you create all the time. It's this divinity, right? If it's immaculate, as they say. But anyhow, so a lot of the scholars would also say that the story about the guy who was the sheep herder, and he supposedly spotted this. I think the story says he spotted this star in the night while he was out grazing his sheep. Or maybe he wasn't grazing his sheep, but maybe the sheep were gone to sleep, but he was just wandering around, because that's what sheep herders do, I guess, at night. But then, what were the sheep feeding on during the day? Because in that part of the world, it was cold, it was the winter, and, it just doesn't make any sense, because there wouldn't have been any grass, really, for the sheep to graze upon. But and then the three wise men that they say in the story, the three wise men came with bearing gifts of frankincense and myrrh and gold. Well, a lot of scholars going back and studying all the ancient, mythology, or how do you say, the documented history of the ancients, they referred to the three wise men as the three stars in Orion's belt. Because recall back then, before the advent of the church and this God that lives outside of you and he's coming to save you and all that nonsense, we looked into the skies and we studied the constellations and we watched for the movement to tell us what time of the year it was, and really everything, to navigate our way around. So that's basically what the three wise men were. And then this, going back to the Immaculate Birth, well, down here in like, say, or anywhere pretty much throughout Central South America, Mexico, I'm not sure about Spain, perhaps in Spain as well, but they would say, instead of Merry Christmas, they would say Feliz Navidad, which means happy birth, which again goes back to this concept of rebirthing yourself and saying, wow, I made it through a winter, so what am I going to create with my life with the coming year? And this word Navidad comes from the Latin word nativ aetatis, and that just basically means I am born, or I have a natural birth. It's even down to my cell level, the cells are dying and they're being reborn every day, so that's where the concept of the birth, or the Navidad, comes from. But it's not like this outside character called Jesus Christ, but rather the rebirth of ourselves, right? As we continue to navigate through our life's journey and our soul's evolutionary path, we're constantly, evolving, and that kind of concept. So what else? Yeah. So that was like the sort of original kind of where the sacred or the holy days came from, where the original festivals came from. And then what the church did was turned it upside down. And they have this guy named Santa Claus, which is based on a character, again, from the north. Krampus, and I'll try to include that in the show notes as well. And it's basically a Germanic deity that was akin to Baphomet. And who's Baphomet? He is the great deceiver. He is the one with all the shiny things, to get you to attract you towards him, but then he's just going to deceive you ultimately. The Baphomet is another word you could say devil or Satan, or kind of this false light, right? So the Krampus character was known as a dark spirit who would come around and steal children. And he had a sack, and instead of presents being in there and giving them to the children, he would actually take the children. And I found this like really interesting when I came across this about, I don't know, which is about 15 years ago. A friend of mine who was from the Congo, he was telling me, how he felt at this time of year when he walked around the streets of the Netherlands and Belgium and stuff. Not so much Belgium, but in the Netherlands. And he said one time he heard this lady who would have been a Germanic, she'd have been grown up with these traditions of the Germanic culture, and she said to him, or she said to her child, she said, if you don't behave, I'm going to give you to that man. And she pointed to my friend who was from the Congo with this beautiful dark African skin. And so that's the Krampus character, and it's like he's physically like black colored, but he's like more like a double spirit kind of thing. So yeah, it's really ooh. Anyway, I'm gonna leave it for there, and I'm going to do another part 2 to cover the rest of it. And ciao for now, family.